Hey guys, welcome back to a Slice of Empathy podcast. Whoa, it's been a minute. I'm actually late in recording this episode, and to be honest, I felt kind of guilty about it, and I don't know. I try to hold myself to a schedule. I don't want to disappoint you guys, but things have just been crazy, and I feel like, I've overcommitted myself lately, and I am just trying to, decipher what it is that I want for this new year. I know we kind of dived into that in our last episode, where we kind of talked about my intentions for the new year, and here we are, almost a day away from March. It's crazy. I can't believe that we're this close to being in March. It's literally like 24 hours away. But it just felt like, the holidays were here, and 2 more months just flew by. So it's just been insane. But, and yeah, I will catch you guys up, but this past month, I think I mentioned on my last episode that I had visited my sister-in-law and my brother-in-law over in North Carolina. Really had a great, amazing time, and I am so thankful. I just left with a feeling of thankfulness and gratitude just for having just so many amazing people in my life who have uplifted me. And not too long after that, I came back. I think it was a few days later. I drove down to San Rafael to spend my friend's birthday with her, and we did some jewelry making, which was really quite fun, and I enjoyed it a lot. And we just had a great time. And it's I don't know, it's just I know one thing I've always kind of struggled with is, I don't know, it might sound silly, but the word love, and knowing what that means. And it can mean different things from person to person. My sister-in-law said it, and my good friend said it. We parted ways with "I love you," and it's not something I'm used to, but it just fills me with so much love and thankfulness, and I am just so grateful. And I'd like to take the opportunity to let you guys know I had actually reached out to my counselor I had mentioned in my podcast episode. May have been a couple episodes back, but I had reached out to her as a counselor that I had when I was in the 5th grade. It had been 6 or so years since I had last seen her. I just can't believe that it's been so long, but we've managed to stay in touch for over 20 years. It's insane. She was just always just an amazing role model in my life. And it's funny because I've met so many people who have told me about doing yoga and meditation. And it's funny, when I was younger, I used to kind of be like, what? Meditation, yoga? That's not going to do anything for me. That's silly. I used to have that mindset. But now that I've kind of dived into it more recently, I can see the benefits of it, and honestly, simply just disconnecting and allowing yourself to just feel and think whatever comes in. And it is just so liberating. But when I was younger, I'm like, what? Just I don't know. To me, it sounded hokey. I'll admit, it sounded hokey, but it really, really does work, and just a very quiet place and setting, and just allowing yourself to just be fully disconnected from any electronics, anything like that. And she was, I think, the first person who'd kind of told me about it. And I know she loves doing yoga and whatnot. And so anyway, I happened to reach out to her and ask how she was doing, and ask if we could meet up sometime. She is quite a bit older, so she is erring on the side of caution, and not having in-person gatherings, because of COVID and all that crazy stuff. And so I asked her, I'm like, okay, maybe we can, do a little Zoom or something like that. I think it would just be so much fun. And she asked me just, what was going on in my life and stuff. And in a few paragraphs, more or less, I had told her basically a summarization of the last 6 or so years. There had been lots of ups and lots of downs, just how life is. but mostly pros and positives when thinking about like where I came from, a lot of things that I feel really accomplished and proud of. And she seems so happy to hear it. She actually happened to have, I think maybe a friend who replied to me because she had an injury, so she couldn't immediately, she couldn't type. So she had a friend reach back out to me, and I actually need to reach back out and follow up on that because I'm like, oh no, like I hope she recovers and just wish her speedy recovery and all that. But it just felt amazing because in her letter, she told me that she was just amazed and grateful to hear that how far I've come, how far my life has come from when she knew me when I was 10 years old, and how things have worked out for me in the better, and that her hope for me is that things continue to only get better and better, and that I deserve that. That was just amazing to hear. It was amazing to hear, and it feels good for me and probably for her to have been someone who's known me for like 20, almost 24 years basically, and seeing me in at pretty much at my absolute worst to now, at my lowest point in my life to now. And I think there's something to be said about that, and so I think it's just probably so rewarding for a lot of professionals. Like I said, like I have a teacher who I feel the same way about, and it's just there's something special. Someone who's known you and just has seen you navigate all these challenges and to see where things end up. I imagine must be special for someone who works with kids. So I just wanted to kind of throw that in there. So I'm excited to maybe reach out to her. I don't know, maybe someday I'll have her on an episode. I don't know, who knows. Stay tuned. But in this episode, I don't want to spend too long like with my rambling this time, but I also want to let you know I had a takeaway from the last few weeks, and because I've spent probably the last couple of years just feeling deep guilt and remorse for things I've said or done over the years, stupid things I've said or done, and asking for forgiveness from folks. And something I was told recently is that I shouldn't have to feel like I always need to apologize for anything or apologize for things, because we all should have that same permission to grow as people. We all make mistakes, and especially like when we're young, I mean, I think back and I'm like, when I was like 16, I thought I'm like, I'm so mature and I have it all together. I know everything. And like, well, maybe I was mature for my age. Sure. Like I look back now and I'm like, yeah, girl, you still have so much learning to do. I look back at that person like you have so many things to learn still. And I think that's common for teenagers. Like you think, when you hit like 18, I have it all figured out. But no, like, oh, I look back now and just think like, you still got some things to learn. And yeah, sometimes I find myself wishing that I could go back with the knowledge that I have now to that person. It's like, what would you tell your younger self in like 3 words? And I'd probably say, for those of you who are in my X-Files community, I'd probably tell myself to maybe not give up. Don't give up. I think those would be the words that I would tell my younger self if I only had 3 words to say. But without further ado, let's go ahead and jump back into where we were left off on our most recent episode, which was back, I think, around the time that we found out my husband's mom, my mother-in-law, had brain cancer. Now, she was diagnosed in 2010, and she passed away in 2013, actually, like, I think only 3 or 4 days after our wedding anniversary. And so for the first couple of years, it was difficult, like, because it was right around our anniversary, and it was kind of bittersweet. And we look back on that now. It's been so long. It's been almost 10 years since my mother-in-law has passed away, and she still doesn't have a headstone. But that's a story for another day. Yeah. And that's not on our behalf, it's on her husband's behalf, who has since remarried. So I don't know. I don't know. Is it normal to like go that long for someone to not have a headstone for 10 years? I don't know. You guys let me know. I don't know. That's weird. Anyway, so she passed away in 2013. So I'll pick back up and I'll dial back a little bit to 2010 or so. I had a job at JCPenney, which I was there for like 6 months. I was about a year or so, year and a half or so after working at the coffee shop. I I don't know, at a young age I was very just kind of like disenfranchised with the workforce, with the recession and my experience at past jobs and whatever. And for the most part, my experience at JCPenney was pretty all right. And that's actually where I met one of my very good friends, Sandy, and we have been great friends ever since. I'm so thankful that I met her, even though I was at that job for 6 months. I'm so thankful. I mean, I feel like the universe has its way of connecting people. And so, we had hung out, and I remember when I left, I was moving on to another job at a grocery store, one of our local regional grocery stores, and I don't know, like, I know she said that she would miss me, and that meant a lot. I know she would miss me, and I will, I'm always, yeah. It was just a friendship that, gosh, it's been almost 13 years since we've known each other. That's insane. And yeah, I had moved on to another job, which I had again encountered a manager who kind of took advantage of me. Initially, she wasn't the manager. I'm not going to name names on here or anything like that, but she was promoted into a manager simply because she had open availability. And she didn't have a car, and she was frequently late for work. She often never cleaned up her messes. She would leave messes for the opener in the morning because I was doing coffee inside the grocery store. I was making coffee as a barista inside the grocery store, and I was only there for probably also about 6 or so months. And toward the end, I ended up giving a week notice, got a bunch of flack for it, but it's one of the times I will never look back on quitting that job. And I just got to the point because I had talked to it was a unionized job. So I had talked to like the union, equivalent of like the HR, and they basically couldn't really do much, basically. I don't even remember what they said, but they couldn't really do much about the way I was being treated. I actually feel like I was low-key sexually harassed by a guy who had worked there who had made a comment about my body as I was bending over to grab something once. And I should have reported it. I look back, it was inappropriate, it was harassment. And I had met another friend there who I was friends with for about a year and a half after that, who I will get into that later. Our friendship kind of dissolved, which was a bit of a bummer, but anyway, this girl who's promoted into a manager, she had like a couple of like baby daddies. She had to get to work via bus, and I don't know, she just made it clear that she just didn't like me for whatever reason. Just resented the fact that I was married, whatever. And I don't know, it was just kind of weird. And I don't know, like, I don't know how I seem to land in these situations, but thankfully I feel like there's been more awareness towards bullying and harassment culture in workplaces, that it seems to be like, of course I'm sure these situations still happen, but there seems to be more of a zero tolerance towards that, like in more recent years. So, I'm really quite thankful for that. But I was there for 6 months, and I remember I actually, for being retail, I normally did not work weekends, and one weekend I happened to ask for off, and that was for my husband's and I, our 3-year wedding anniversary. So that 3-year wedding anniversary, asked for the day off because we were planning to go to Tahoe. And the same girl was the one who approved our timesheets, our schedules, and whatnot. And it just so happened that she gave herself that day off and scheduled me to work. Now, normally I wouldn't come to conclusions, but the fact that I had normally didn't work weekends, but I was just putting it down to say, hey, I won't be available just in case. And the fact that she purposely scheduled me, I'm like, I'm done. And I gave a week's notice. I remember a manager approached me and said, this won't fly at any other job that you have. This isn't cool. And I didn't know what to say. We're in California, so technically I know so a 2-week notice, we're basically in an at-will employment state, which means employment can be terminated by either party, either the employer or employee, at any given time for any reason. And so, yes, if you want to remain on good terms with your employer and, you want to use them as a reference and whatnot, yes, the general consensus and common courtesy is to give a 2-week notice. But you don't have to, especially if you are in a toxic work environment like I was, that I had found myself in. So I felt like, all things considered, a week was generous. So I had given my notice. They scheduled my last day to be an opening day, which was 5 a.m. or something, which again, I never did. I literally never opened. And so I will say, I called out sick that day. And I knew that this girl was doing it intentionally and was getting away with it. And so I'm like, no, I'm not doing this anymore. And so that was it. I had called out at night, said, no, I'm sick, I'm not coming in. And that was it. Actually, during this 6 months too, I remember I had gotten physically sick. And normally you have to call in at least 2 hours ahead of time if you're going to call out sick. Now, I think it was about an hour or so, hour and a half. I was feeling funny. I thought maybe, I'd feel better after a little bit of rest. Things would get better, whatever. I had a little bit of a stomach ache. But about an hour or 45 minutes before I had to go to work, I threw up. And I'm like, okay, I guess I'm really sick. I can't go into work like this. This was food service, guys. Obviously can't be around people or food or anything like that. So I called out. And the day I came back to work, they wrote me up. They wrote me up for calling out less than 2 hours before work. And looking back, they'll make you sign your write-up. But legally, you don't have to sign it. If you don't agree with it, you don't have to sign it. But they will ask you to sign it. And I signed it, but I look back and I shouldn't have signed it because I didn't agree with it. It was truly a situation to where I thought I was going to feel better and I started feeling sick. And just the fact that they expected me to come in like that is just that tells you all. That tells you all you need to know. So this was in summer of 2011. And I think this was about a month or two before I got my driver's license. And there's another episode I want to talk to you guys about. Another topic of discussion I was 22 when I first got my driver's license. I was 22. I was a little bit older than most, but looking back, I don't regret it. I was going through so many other things, and I was in fight or flight response for quite a long time, and needed to, get so many other parts of my life in order before that's something that I could focus on. But luckily, I lived in a place where it was very easy to get around, either by public transit or walking. But I did face a great deal of criticism and shame from a lot of folks because I had waited so long to get my license and drive. and that's another topic I'll discuss later. But I had gotten my license, and then shortly after that, FYI, it took me 3 times, and mostly the first time was because I didn't know the hand signals for the bicyclists and whatnot, and so I immediately failed. And I think I had practice off and on. I had a permit a couple of times, and then it expired since I was about 18, and then and just kind of let it go, and then took the test again. I think it's just the written test. Got my permit again, but then I didn't take the written test until I was 22, and passed on the third time. I don't remember the second time why I didn't pass. I don't remember, but I passed on the third time, and I kind of cheated a little bit because I used my driver's mirrors, the little mirrors on the outside, to kind of I was able, you know how you can adjust the mirrors. I adjusted the mirrors so I could see how I'm parking, because here in California that you're required to parallel park during your driver's test. You're required to parallel park, and to this day, I'm almost 34, I can parallel park, but I will try and avoid it if I can. Mostly if it's I can just slide right behind someone, sure. But when it comes to parking between two closely parked cars, it's a stretch. So I will park further away. But if I can slide in to someone, I can back up straight, things like that. It's just yeah. And I think a lot of people can't or don't or won't or refuse to parallel park, especially if you're someone who lives in more of a rural area, you're not used to city driving. It's just something you kind of pick up. Now, I've gotten better out of the throughout the years, but driving a bigger car and stuff like that now, it's sometimes it's still kind of a pain. And if you hit the curb, I think it's an automatic fail on your driver's test. But yeah, so I'm pretty grateful because during this point in time, I think I had a family friend, and then my husband mostly, who was with me when I had my permit. When I had gotten my permit, I had spent time with them, my husband and a family friend, kind of driving around, and so that's kind of how I learned when I was older, and that was helpful because I feel I don't know, I saw my brother when he was learning to drive with my dad, and my dad was not patient with him, and I just knew that as someone who has a lot of anxiety, I would need someone who would be patient with me, and knock on wood, I haven't had any at-fault accidents up to this day, so I'm super proud of that. But for a long time, I felt I don't know, I wasn't sure when or if I would drive. I think that'll be another episode, because I could have a whole discussion on that. But anyway, after that, I got to meet my two idols, Gillian Anderson and David Duchovny, and also Chris Carter, creator of the X-Files. Shortly after that, we drove down to SoCal. I think it was one of our first times going down to SoCal. It was an amazing trip, and listening to both Gillian and David and Chris talking to one another. It was just, if it's another one of those things. But just meeting these idols that, I had looked up to from watching a show since I was 11. And gosh, I was only 22. So I'd only, I've been watching X-Files for, wow, more than 2/3 of my life at this point. It's always been my touchstone has been X-Files, through and through. So that I'm grateful for that. So, for a couple of months I wasn't working, and then I had landed this office job for a small e-commerce company that had a few different types of businesses. It was like fortune cookies for dogs, fortune like regular fortune cookies, selling travel packages for Olympic games and whatnot. And it was interesting. And they also sold, I think, like technology packages for travel agencies and whatnot. So I was there for like 2 years, and it was my first like quote unquote like big girl job, I guess. Like I don't know, however you want to see it. Didn't have benefits, which was kind of a bummer. Didn't have any benefits or anything. The guy was I could go on about him, but he was total micromanager. Loved to throw his weight around and wanted to feel in control at all times. We couldn't listen to music, couldn't do, we had to answer the phone corporate office just to sound like we were this big operation. And then when customers would come, they would be like, I'm looking for the fortune cookie store. And they're expecting an actual storefront, not this like little office with like 4 people. But this was actually my first like content based job. And at that time, I was thinking about getting into real estate. I was studying for my real estate license. I was thinking about graduating with a degree in real estate. But then I honestly changed that major later on to business management because I feel like, well, if I change directions and I want to do something else that's not real estate, a business management degree will be more versatile. And with real estate, you don't even need a degree. You just need a real estate license. So that's what I decided to do. And I'm glad I did because I did decide later on after getting this job that I didn't want to do real estate. I wanted to do something that was more like marketing and content creation and social media and stuff like that. So that's kind of where my career kind of picked off. And, I've been doing it for, like 12 years now, I guess. 12 years? Yeah, so I've been doing it for 12 years. So that was kind of a very entry-level job. I had just graduated community college in 2011, and I just transferred to university. And my husband and I were doing distance learning, so we were doing it online, which I will 100% stand behind. I remember we got so much flack for doing distance learning from folks in our family who would mostly be like, oh, well, you should go to a physical school and it's not legit if it's online and da 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 da. But fast forward, here we are now. We're like, especially with COVID and that landscape changed so much where like even like kids in school, like in grade school, are doing school online and whatnot. And it's just like the nature of things, just how things are now. And I'm glad I did it that way because it allowed me to still work while getting that experience and also paying my bills. So it was important that I'd be able to simultaneously, work, pay bills, and also get my education. And I went to a small private college called Marylhurst. Marylhurst was a Catholic university, and unfortunately, only a couple of years back, it had closed, I think due to like a lot of financial reasons. It was a nonprofit, I believe, institution, but they were around for over 100 years. But I think it was the lack of, I think, students and tuition that they were getting that they decided to close. And I remember at one point I was thinking about getting a master's degree, but then I think it was a couple of years after, and ended up deciding not to do it, and that's a different discussion. But both of my husband and I ended up going to school for business management, and we would do that while we were both simultaneously working. And while this was all happening, so it was a year. I think I skipped ahead a little bit, but about a year or so before that, my paternal grandmother had passed away, and this was shortly after we found out my husband's mom had brain cancer. And I'm trying to remember, I think she passed away of somewhat natural causes. I mean, she had some health problems, and towards the end, she just wasn't really eating and just getting real frail. She wasn't like that old, but I think she was like only 79, but she looked like she was way older because she didn't take care of her health. And I remember when I got that call because she was in a care facility at the time. We had gone to Santa Cruz with my husband's brother and his wife. And I think at the time, that was an eventful day. Firstly, my husband had gotten a speeding ticket, and there was an area where it drops from like I don't know, 50 miles per hour to like 20, like really fast, and he didn't notice it. Got a ticket. That was kind of a pisser. And we weren't even in Santa Cruz, we were walking around, just kind of hanging out. And then I got the call from my dad that my grandmother had passed away and that I needed to come right away to the care facility. And looking back at that now, I don't know why, if she had passed away already, why I had to come immediately, because, the inevitable happened. They had asked my dad if, he wanted to resuscitate her. He said no. He wanted to respect her wishes. She had been wanting to pass away for a long time, and her health wasn't good, and resuscitating her would kill her. So yeah, I remember that day. We had to go back, and I felt kind of bad that we just got there. We're there for maybe a half hour at most. Then we had to turn right back around. And, his brother and his brother's wife, they were super nice about it, totally understood. And we went to go see my grandmother who passed away. I remember seeing her body. It was yellowing and I think cold. And I don't know if rigor mortis had set in, but I know it was disturbing to my husband because it reminded him of when his dad passed away. And, he was there to support me, and I appreciate that. And I think my brother was there. My brother's girlfriend at the time, I think, was there too. And, it was hard to see her that way. And I think, but I don't know, that's just kind of how my dad seems to process grief. And I remember when we had to put our dog to sleep. This was shortly before my husband and I got married. We had to put our dog to sleep that I had known since I was 10 years old. And I had to watch that process of her being euthanized, humanely and all that. But having her last meal and everything, very deeply traumatizing. I remember going to work right afterwards. And looking back, I should have at least taken that day off, maybe a couple of days. I just couldn't get the image out of my head. And it was kind of the same thing when I saw my grandmother. I just couldn't get it out of my head. And after that experience, I decided that I'm I don't need to see the physical body of someone who's passed to get my closure. Especially at this point, she had already passed. There was nothing else we can do. I mean, in my dad's mind, it was us, to pay our respects and whatnot. And I mean, I get that, but also at the same time, I feel like it should be up to the individual how they handle and want to process their grief, because not everyone does it in the same way. And, that's hard for a lot of people. Some people, they'll want to see the body, but other people, like myself, I'd prefer to not have that be my last memory of my loved one. And when my other grandmother later passed away, that was the choice that I made on my own. Having my family see it and have that closure was enough for me. I didn't need to see it for myself. But yeah, so I think back then I wish that I was still, not controlled, but just like a people pleaser and not really knowing that I had autonomy and choice. And yeah, anyway, I mean, it was difficult. And that was when I had a couple of jobs before. And that was not easy. And during these couple of years, we had to navigate, my we're both working and going to school, and my husband would have to take his mom to her medical appointments. And I know they were doing therapy together at one point, and just all of this going on. It's like for a new marriage, for like a young couple working, going to school, and having to navigate like illness in the family. Like it was a lot. And yeah, sometimes I look back, I'm like, oh my gosh, like how did we manage all that? I think that's why I'm like so burned out nowadays, like over the littlest things, like takes so much energy. Like I kid you not. But I think it was just accumulation of just years of not having a breather. But then, okay, so later on in 2011, when I had gotten this office job and we were starting university and whatnot, my husband's stepfather, I remember, I don't know, I made a post about Columbus Day or something like that. Nothing even concerned him. He got super offended, and he basically made the choice like, well, I'm not speaking to you now. I'm disowning you. And his mom went along. My mother-in-law went along with my husband's stepdad. Just kind of went along with it and kind of echoed what he said. And later on, I think I mentioned in another episode that she had said, I married an asshole just like my father. So some part of her knew that she married someone who was like her father. And it's always been said that like, women marry someone like their dad, and guys marry someone like their mom. And maybe that's like kind of the case for my husband. But I think from what I'm hearing more recently, from what I've kind of found and discovered, is that children will gravitate towards a partner who is most like the parent they're trying to repair subconsciously a damaged relationship with. So they're looking to repair a damaged relationship with that one parent, and that could be a dad or a mom or whatever, whichever parent that is. And that was kind of an interesting realization, because I think I do have some of the traits that my husband's mom had, for sure. But my husband and my dad, I don't think they're really anything alike. I think he's more like my mom, which is interesting. Yeah, so it's interesting. So this was 2011. I think my mother-in-law at one point had her cancer go into remission, and I think this was when they did this whole like disowning. They disowned us. I mean, literally over a Facebook post, which is I'm glad I don't even really spend too much. I don't even really get on Facebook much anymore. But yeah, we're a Facebook post. And yeah, so we had to, I remember my husband sent an email saying, let's just let bygones be bygones. Let's just let this past be behind us. No, they were holding strong on that. They're like, nope, didn't want to talk to us anymore. Until like a year later, when I think my husband's mom's cancer had come back. And I think, because she started off with stage 2, and I think it had come back to stage 4. And that was when we were invited to her birthday party, which I talked about in my last episode. And I remember my husband was only told like a couple days before, like last minute. This was a big birthday party, but my husband was told last minute, likely because someone maybe told his stepdad that, yeah, you should invite her son. Otherwise, like, he would be the one who would be looking bad. His stepdad, anyway, for not inviting him. And so we did go. I had prearranged other plans that day, but we made it work so we could go. But it was a very one-sided relationship, always on their terms. And I think now, looking back, I realize a lot of that was my husband's stepfather, because she married someone who was like her abusive father. And she knew it too. She had acknowledged it at one point, I think, in therapy with my husband, and also when we were together, when she made that statement. And inhibitions were just loose, and she just came out and said that she married someone who is toxic, just like her dad. And it brought a lot of clarity, and it makes sense why she just kind of went along with what he said. And I tell my husband now, and I'm like, none of it was your fault. Your mom was young when she had you. She came from trauma, hadn't really dealt with it. None of that was your fault. And she had her own issues, and as a result of that, she married someone who was a lot like her own her own father, and that's how things ended up kind of turning out. So I'm like, it's not on you, and so I think we know that now. We look back and realize that now, like it wasn't anything that we did. His stepdad just was not a nice person, and his mom, a lot of times when women are in abusive relationships, they will often try to not cover up, but they will try and excuse the behavior of the abuser, or make sense of it, or try to justify it in some way. And it's really nothing about you. And yeah, so it's been enlightening to kind of learn that, because at the time it's like we took it very personally, like we were just treated like we just murdered somebody, just over a Facebook post. Like, it's ridiculous. And yeah, so after the birthday, my husband, I think, spent more and more time with his mom. I think she was to the point where she was on hospice care, and inevitably, I think it was like 6-7 months later where she had passed away. Yeah, and I just it was difficult. And I remember shortly before she passed away, his stepfather would tell even his uncles and tell him that his mom didn't want to see anyone, including like her own son, like would not see anyone. But shortly, a couple days before she passed away, we actually, for our 5-year wedding anniversary, went back to Tahoe to renew our vows. And yeah, that was a difficult time. But we went back to renew our vows, and I remember his stepdad my husband's stepdad told him that he's like, he's like, no, you shouldn't go. Like, your mom can pass away, and you shouldn't go. You shouldn't go anywhere. Now, I could sort of understand, like, where he's coming from, but also in a way, like, this is the same person who's like, no, she doesn't want to see anyone. This is, you can only come visit on our terms, yada, yada. But now it's like, we have something coming up that is special for us. Like, no, you shouldn't go. Like, it's like really controlling. Like, okay, one minute you're saying, no, we can't visit, it always has to be like scheduled or whatever. And now you're saying, no, don't go anywhere. And I was telling my husband, I'm like, I don't know, at least to me, I know everyone, again, handles grief differently, but I know it was hard for my husband to have to sit and have to watch her pass away slowly. And I'm like, your mom wouldn't want you to be miserable, to be sad, and to miss out on something fun. And your mom wouldn't want that for you, And so we did go and renew our vows. And she'd passed away a couple days later. Because at this point, she was no longer conscious. So any visits were just basically watching her vigil, just watch her sleep, basically. And, but yeah, his stepdad tried to guilt us into not going, which, again, if this were, like, if the situation were different, I would agree with him. But it's just like, okay, no, you can only visit on our terms. Oh, no, now you can't go anywhere. Wanting to have that control. And so I told my husband, like, we gotta make that decision. So we ended up going, and I remember it was a 4-hour drive in the morning, and we picked up my mom and my stepdad that day, and I don't remember exactly what happened, but my mom got mad at me. I was flustered in a rush because we had to be there at a certain time, and my mom like got snapped at me, and I don't remember what exactly was said, but I just remember that I carry that with me throughout the day, and then I was trying to make it not bother me. And I think that's when I realized that I'm like, it kind of reminded me of when we got married, and I did not have a good relationship with my dad at the time, and people left early, and then he exchanged words with me, and it's just like, if you have any sort of large wedding, there's always going to be something, like whether it's the cake not being made correctly, or a family member who's not acting correct. I don't know, whatever. There's always something. It's never going to be 100% perfect. Things happen, especially like the bigger it is. And so I think that's what made my husband and I realize, I'm like, next time we renew our vows, let's just go alone. Let's just go, somewhere that we've always wanted, and just the two of us and like a witness or whatever. Well, I don't even think we need a witness because they're just renewing vows. But yeah, I don't remember. I want to remember exactly what happened, but I just remember feeling just so hurt. And this was supposed to be a special day, and I'm just like, oh great, another day that is ruined. I can't ever have like the perfect day. And for a long time I was so hell-bent on having this like perfect day. And now I realize, after all of the trials and turmoils my husband and I have been through, you really do realize it's what you make of the marriage, not the day that you exchange vows or get married, because that's over quickly. And it doesn't matter what that day was about. It matters what your relationship was like, how you navigate the marriage, and how you handle things together, how you get through things together. That's really is what matters within a marriage. And so it doesn't bother me anymore, because for a long time I'll look back and think like, oh my God, like my wedding was ruined, and I can't go back and undo that. And now I'm like, honestly, if I could do anything differently, I'd probably have a different, I'll do a whole podcast episode on some of my regrets, but I would just honestly probably just elope, and spend the money on a nice honeymoon instead, because weddings are great and all, but it's over quickly. Your day is over. And I think the money would rather be better spent on a trip of a lifetime. And since we were broke college students, we didn't get that. After we got married, we went right back to school, I think, the following weekend. But yeah, so yeah, and I think leading up to those months, my husband and I had taken a side job for this woman who had a shapewear business. And I initially started doing marketing on the side. So I had two jobs, and I was going to school, and it was getting kind of difficult to manage, because I think I was working 30 hours a week plus the side job plus going to school. So I remember it being difficult. Gosh, it was 10 years ago now, and doing marketing, and I think it was only lasted a month or two. But I think towards the end, I remember this woman got really condescending and sour towards me when she would demand to be when I'd give her okay, here's my hours worked, here's what I did, she'd try and be oh, well, X, Y, and Z shouldn't have taken that long. Show me what you did, blah, blah, blah. When I tried to tell her how many hours I worked. And so she'd try to justify why she didn't have to pay me. And I was only being paid I think minimum wage also, so I don't know. And my husband was doing some shipping stuff for her, and would go house sit for her and stuff like that. And he had to wait for a package at her house, and he had to wait 6 hours. And then she was like, oh, well, you weren't doing anything during that time. Why should I have to pay you? You were just sitting there. And it's just oh, well, time is money. We had to wait for, he had to wait for a package. But I think we both mutually decided to stop working for her, I think at the same time, and I think it was by text message. And she went on to say how unprofessional we were, and how our work was mediocre, and just very unprofessional things. I mean, again, we were just working for this woman just for some extra cash, but just the way she went about it was very unprofessional. If this were a professional work environment, I'd be that's not happening. That's not okay to talk to someone like that. It's not okay to be like, oh, well, I shouldn't have to pay you. Or I think there was another instance where she wanted to dock pay. I don't know, it was from one of us. She wanted to dock pay, and we ended up having to go to the labor board, which California has a great system that protects its hourly workers. So if you're ever in a situation where you even have a question about your employer, go to labor board, especially if you're not getting your breaks on time, you're missing lunches, things like that. So I went to labor board, and I was really anxiety inducing because she made all kinds of threats towards us in this process when she got notified that she was being called to the labor board. And I remember being in the meeting, and my husband and I were together, and she just looked like she hated every millisecond of being there. She didn't even look at us directly. She looked down the whole time. And I remember the labor commissioner, was asking us both questions and whatnot. And she tried to explain, why she wanted to dock pay or whatever. And the labor commissioner was like, you can't do that. Like, you can let somebody go if their work isn't up to par. You can let them go. But you can't agree to pay someone hourly and then decide to dock pay. Like, you can't do that. And this woman, it became apparently that, because she was foreign and clearly did not know anything about labor laws at this point in time, and was getting a quick lesson in that. And when it came out that she would have, if we went to court against her, that she'd have to pay us out to the equivalent of like $3,000. And we were only asking, I think, for a few hours of pay, like I think like $80 and like $120. At the time, that was a lot of money for us. We were broke. We needed the money. We were really stretched thin, struggling. Our rent was late all the time. A lot of our credit cards had to be let go. It was just a really difficult time. So like it was like gold to us. So like we eventually went to labor board, and she had an option to where just to pay up the cash that she owed us right then and there, or we could take her to court. And it was up to us. And the labor commissioner let her know that if we were to take this to court, she could be out several $1,000s because of the accrued penalties for each day that she hadn't paid us. Because I think when you're paid late by an employer, there are penalties that you can claim. Like if you have a missed paycheck or you're not paid on time, there are penalties that accrue daily that you can collect off of that. And at this point, I think it had been a couple of weeks, so she owed us penalties. However, if we did go to court, the downside is that it would probably take at least a year to see a courtroom, and we needed the money like right then, so we ended up just settling for what we were owed. But just seeing the look of the just dejection on her face, just like how resigned she looked, was enough satisfaction for the way she treated us and just getting what we were owed. When she realized that her story would not hold up. And I remember she paid out a couple $100s for me to purchase gift cards for the company, and then later tried to say that she overpaid me. And I'm like, no, this amount of dollars was because you had given me the funds to purchase gift cards for the company, and I have the receipts for said gift cards. I have the receipts. And the labor commissioner looks over at her, is like, is this true? And she's like, oh, well, I'll have to go back and look at my records. Like, she couldn't hold her story straight. So the labor commissioner was like, well, you were so sure of yourself just a minute ago. And I guess this woman played on the fact and hoped that my husband and I were not, that she prayed on our naivete, I would say, and just hope that we wouldn't know anything about labor laws or about receipts or whatever, and I'm like, no, I have the receipts of what that money was for and used on, and she couldn't come back with anything. And so yeah, it was enough walking away from that situation, and it was a very short stunt, but yeah, it just kind of soured my experience working for a single employer, like, or just like a one man or one woman show, because there's no HR department. There's nowhere to go if you have an issue with your boss. That's it. Like, you got to either go to the labor board, you got to quit and then sue or whatever, or take them to court. I mean, or file complaints. There's very limited things you can do. That was in the midst of, yeah, that was shortly before my husband's mom passed away. And then my husband's grandfather, I think, passed away either shortly before his mom or shortly after. And he was, older. He was in his early 90s. He had dementia and stuff like that. So it had been some time coming. But he was such a great man. And I remember reading at his funeral about a story that, when he was at our wedding and how he got his piece of cake before anyone else at our wedding and came walking out with it. And it was just so amazing to me because my husband's aunts really appreciated that I spoke and talked about that story and that memory, and they still do. And so that meant the world for me. So I had the opportunity to do that, and I think, yeah, it was around our graduation time. I think shortly before I think we graduated, I think my brother had broke up with his ex for a variety of different reasons, and that was after 5 years. That was a big deal. But he ended up meeting his current wife, I think, like about a month or so later, and she was a really sweet and amazing person, and she's just a great individual. Couldn't ask for a better sister-in-law, Gracie, if you're listening. Anyway, yeah, so it was a year. That was 2013. I kind of jumped around a little bit, I know, from 2011 to 2013. So many things on our plates. But later that year, after my husband's mom passed away, I think we went to the cemetery, and my husband actually happened to see his stepdad. We saw, or at least he saw him one last time. It's been 10 years now. Last time he saw him, and I told my husband, I'm like, he wanted to go say hi to his stepdad. I'm like, okay, I'll let you go ahead. I'll just wait in the car, because I knew what the result would be. I knew, and so I just let my husband go. I'm like, okay, I'll just wait here for you. And when he comes back, he tells me that his stepdad didn't say a word to him. He came up and he said hi. I guess his stepdad said hi. He didn't say anything else to him. Nothing whatsoever. And then I think my husband came back to the car. And yeah, so we haven't seen or spoken to his stepdad since. And that says a lot for someone his mom was married to for probably, like, I don't know, almost 25 years or something. It was a long time, maybe 20 years. And maybe 20 or 20 something years. And so later that year, I resigned from the small office job that I had, that I was working for. That guy, like, man, the guy was a piece of work. I remember he told me, I think, so I had worked for this guy for a while, and then I found another job right after I had finished my 4-year degree in business management. I graduated, found this other job. Not entirely what I was like. I mean, it was like a managerial position, but it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. But it paid well, and it was with a tech company. And I'm like, okay, great. Like, this is what I'm looking for. And they had like free meals 4 out of 5 days of the week. It was sweet. It was great. They had flex time, everything. And fast forward 3 months, they, on my 90th day, they decided to let me go without any reason. completely and utterly devastating because just when we thought we would, we were finally going to be getting our bills paid and all that, and things were looking up. It just felt like my world was just crashing around me. This was the weekend before Christmas, so I had lost this job, and I'm like, what are we gonna do? We were barely paying bills. What are we gonna do? And a couple days later, and this was over a weekend, one of my cats had been sick. We had taken her to the vet, I think, like the next day or something, and they gave her some medicine. A couple days later, I was, spending some time with a friend. I came home and she was under my bed and passed away, my cat Luna. And I had to call my friend to come back and take me with her back to her house because I was beside myself. I couldn't touch her body, or I think I did, and my friend couldn't even look at her body either because my friend had just lost her dog a couple months before that. And so we both kind of sat together by the edge of the bed, and she kind of looked under there and kind of reached, and we both kind of touched her together. And she's like, "Yeah, I think she's passed away." And she sat there with me, and we cried together. This was the day before Christmas Eve that this happened. So 3 days after I lost my job, and I lost my beloved kitty. And so I went back to my friend's house, and we waited until my husband got off work. And then when he came over to pick me up, we told him that she had passed away and we needed him to help with the body. And he did it. He said that I think he went home to wrap her body up and then came back to get me. And I could tell that he was upset, and he had a hard time doing it, but he did it. And the next day we went to take her to be cremated at the Humane Society. This was Christmas Eve, I think. Yes. Yeah, it was on Christmas Eve. And so we took her to be cremated, and I think a couple folks had pitched in funds for us to pay for her to be cremated. And until this day, I wish that somehow we had asked or come up with the funds to get her ashes returned to us, because it was an extra fee. But at the time, we didn't know we had that option, because we didn't. When my dog passed away, we didn't get her ashes back. We just paid for her cremation. And so when we were presented with the option, we just didn't have the money. So she was cremated in another group of animals. So that was tough. And I remember going to Christmas Eve. I think it was later that day. Later that day, we went to our family gathering with my husband's family, and we had it was Christmas Eve. I was trying to get through it. I think something came up, and one of his aunts asked about how my job was going, and I didn't know what to say. I told her, and then she told me to not tell my husband's grandmother, because she would get really worried, and she would just get really worried about it. So she recommended not telling her, and then told me later. She said that she's like, I shouldn't have told you that. It's up to you if you want to tell her or not, and let that be on me. And I think we ended up telling her, and it was hard. And we had, in a very short amount of time, we had to decide what was the next step, because we couldn't continue to pay our apartment. My unemployment would be based on my prior job, because it was the longest job, and it wouldn't be enough to sustain. And we had decided, I think, within a week or two, to move up to the Sacramento area from the Bay Area. And we decided that was the best. And this was something that had sort of been a long time coming. We had talked about potentially moving out of the area, but then never did for a variety of reasons, which is kind of a regret, until we were forced to. Like, okay, what do we do? We have to move. We have to do something else. And my husband had managed to get a transfer at his job at the time from the job that he had. And then we decided to move, and I think I will leave you guys off there for this podcast episode, and get into the next chapter of my life where we move. We basically jumped on, took a leap of faith, so to speak, and jumped into the next venture. So thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. It was a little bit longer than I intended, but I super appreciate you guys sticking around and waiting for me and supporting. It means so much more than you can imagine. I will be back here in a few weeks with the next episode. So until then, guys, I will see you next time. Bye.